This is a load management dialogue presented by PLMA. Here you'll discover practitioner perspectives on flexible energy load management, demand response, and distributed energy resources. Today's session is the second of a four-part series that PLMA is conducting this summer on the very important order made by Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in September 2020, known as Order 2222. FERC always telegraphs when they think it's an important order by skipping out of their sequence and putting a special number to it. So 2222 is meant to be a number that sticks in our heads. Officially, this order is titled Participation of Distributed Energy Resource Aggregations in Markets Operated by Regional Transmission Organizations and Independent System Operators. It's intended to be a pivotal action in removing barriers to DER aggregations in organized markets. Since that time, FERC and the RTOs and ISOs have been working toward implementation of the order, and utilities are trying to figure out what it all means and what preparations they need to be making. Brief moment for logistics. Due to the large amount of registrants for this session, over 170 at my last reckoning, we're executing this webinar, in webinar format. So you attendees, you see that your cameras and microphones are turned off. So interaction with the speakers will come through using the chat function in Teams. You'll find the chat bubble probably up at the top of your screen if it's like mine, in the Teams application, and we will address questions the best we can at the conclusion of the roundtable conversation. The moderator for today's session panel discussion is Patty Cook of ICF, where she's a Senior Vice President in the Clean Energy Solutions practice. It's my pleasure now to hand this over to Patty to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Rich, and welcome everyone. As Rich said, I'm Patty Cook. I lead Market Development, Clean Energy Solutions for ICF. As Rich mentioned, today's webinar is session 2 of a multi-part series to provide insights on FERC Order 2222. And last month we heard from FERC's David Cathan and Nicole Bucinelli, who provided a great overview of FERC 2222 and the timeline, compliance requirements. So for those that missed it, the slides and the recording can be found on the PLMA website. So as you know, though, the proceeding is an open and active proceeding, and there are a number of issues that are still very much in play, and multiple parties are still weighing in. So to be expected, the FERC presenters did a really nice job of coloring in the lines in terms of their commentary on these evolving issues, but they really weren't at liberty to discuss much because of the open docket. So today's webinar will go a little bit deeper into some of the implications of ISO RTO compliance with 2222, but from the perspective of 3 utilities. While the order doesn't directly require compliance on the part of the utility, many of the provisions will affect utility planning, investments in technology and grid modernization, grid operations, including the provision of safety and reliability. The requirements will also affect how utilities achieve important policy goals like decarbonization, equity, and affordability. Given the current climate crisis we're in, the stakes couldn't be much higher. Today, I'm really fortunate to be joined by several colleagues from different parts of the country representing different regional ISOs. So if you wouldn't mind, Justin, Erica, and Jeff, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I was mentioned first, so I'll go first. So I'm Justin Felt, Director of Policy at Exelon. And so, I'm speaking on behalf of the corporation. This is a holding company that involves a number of different utilities, ComEd in Illinois, PECO in Pennsylvania, PG&E in Maryland, as well as a number of companies under Pepco Holdings that include companies in New Jersey, Maryland, and DC. So I'll be speaking on behalf of our experience. We all are a part of the PGM RTO, so at least we can speak from that sort of level of unity. And I focus on state level policy and regulatory affairs, with also, a focus on DERs.
Patty, would you like me to go next?
Sorry, I didn't. I think Justin cut out for a bit. So thank you, Justin. Yes, please, Erica.
Sure. My name is Erica Brown. I work for Pacific Gas and Electric, and I'm the Director of Energy Policy within our Energy Policy and Procurement Department. PG&E is within the California ISO. My work actually focuses primarily on policy issues at the CPUC, although I coordinate closely with our CAISO team. And I work on a variety of issues, including supply side issues, so things like capacity policy, which we call resource adequacy. But I also work on distributed energy resource compensation. So avoided cost and our net energy metering policy are probably the two biggest examples of those. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Erica. Jeff?
Yes, good morning. My name is Jeff Brown. I'm with the Public Service Company of Oklahoma, and I'm the Consumer Programs Manager. I manage the energy efficiency and demand response, as well as a number of different pilots for PSO. PSO is a member of the American Electric Power system of companies. In my role as a energy efficiency and demand response implementer, I definitely have a insight into some of these demand response and energy efficiency programs. PSO participates in the SPP market. We're still a fully integrated utility in the state of Oklahoma. Our energy efficiency goals are required by the state, and they're part of our IRP plan and our long-term capacity plan. So we're definitely trying to make sure that we're bringing the value back to all customers. PSO has about 10,000 thermostats currently and 1,800 businesses that are part of our demand response programs. So when you think about DER aggregator, PSO has been in that role for some time and participating to help all of our customers here in Oklahoma.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you to all the panel members for agreeing to join today and spend this time with us. So there's a number of different directions we could take this conversation. It's a big topic. We're not going to solve things today, but I'd like to start by focusing conversation on a few things that we've discussed around the compliance mechanisms that have been outlined by FERC, mainly the ones that are most relevant to the audience today, who are all involved in load management in one form or another. So the audience will remember from FERC's presentation that the order includes a requirement to allow what's called dual participation, where an aggregator of DERs can participate in retail programs that utilities offer, while also allowing those DERs to provide multiple wholesale services. So in practical terms, what that might mean is, for example, an aggregation of DERs or a virtual power plant might be needed to provide resiliency or distribution services as part of an NWA, but may also be registered to participate in the wholesale market. So can you talk a little bit about how this dual participation requirement might change how your utility's thinking about DERs as a grid resource and your relationship with customers? And I don't know who wants to go first on that one. Maybe I'm going to pick on maybe Justin. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so one thing to say is that at least, with the Exelon utilities and with PJM, aggregation is not necessarily new, at least in the demand response folks, space, and people will know about that are attending this. So it's not going to be a sea change from a demand response side. The key question is when you start talking about net metered and injectable generation, it does sort of change that equation a little bit. And so how it will change? Well, it depends on how quickly this ramps up. This will provide another avenue for customers to derive value from their DERs when it's implemented, but it does present some logistical things that we need to think about. One is how you deal with participating in wholesale markets while also having a retail bill. So something, at least with the way that PJM has filed it, this will be something that'll be handled at the state level and definitely needs to be sort of worked out with state level commissions, with utilities. But just making sure that they're not deriving two values or double counting when they're providing wholesale services, but also getting credit for a retail, that credit as part that value as part of their, their retail compensation at the state level. So that's something we'll have to think about. And then I think from the, one thing I haven't heard talked a lot about is just the billing aspect of this. That is something that when we get to more of the implementation phase, we start seeing a lot more of these FERC approvals coming through, just thinking about the logistics of how we make sure that on that retail bill, the customer is, all those values represented appropriately. So if they are participating in wholesale, it's not necessarily, it's sort of netted out or it's not included as part of that retail bill. So there's some things to think about that way. And then there's a lot of things we need to talk about in terms of communication, logistics, metering, telemetry. So what I think what it's going to do is it's going to kind of really force the relationship with the customer as well as utility to think a little more about how we can participate and really, value stack for all these different customers. And I think it's a good pathway for us to, to build on what we, retail programs that are, driven through tariffs and through, policy, and use this as an additional lever to, drive value for customers.
Great, thanks, Justin. Yeah, I like the fact you mentioned value stacking. I think that's something that utilities are in a good position to do. Erica or Jeff, do you want to weigh in on this one?
I'm happy to. I mean, Jeff, is that all right? Sorry.
Sure, go for it.
I think I agree with a lot of what Justin said, right? There is a basis for this in California, certainly with our demand response programs. And, we already have, I think, 11% of our residential customers are customer generators with rooftop solar on their roof. I think we're thinking of this as another avenue for them to expand their participation in this decarbonization process. And I think we're lucky that we have a lot of customers who are engaged in that. That said, it ups the complexity factor a lot. So billing is an issue, for example, but I think even if you were to look at say they're participating in some sort of distribution deferral program, there would be certain requirements for how they operate so that they can actually provide distribution referral. Those requirements might not match the requirements they have participating in the California ISO market, depending on what their participation there looks like. So those types of things we'll have to work out. So I would put that in the category of sort of like conflicting objectives of the different values that we're stacking. And we'd like to work it out so that it's as easy as possible for the customer. And I think we're still working through how to do that. In addition to the sort of conflicting objectives, we have to work through issues like incrementality, making sure we're not double counting or double compensating. So a lot of that, I think, hopefully we can do on our end, working with the CAISO and the CPUC so that the process feels seamless for the customer. But there's certainly no small amount of complexity to work through.
Yeah, I'd agree with both the other speakers, and just say that demand response particularly is kind of the low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's something that's been around for some time, so it's very familiar, and it's in these energy efficiency terms is one of the easiest things to go after. So I think getting the rules right sooner than later is a must. Having that market transparency to really be able to bring that value back to all ratepayers who kind of built the grid to date, because in many instances, utilities, particularly integrated utilities, have designed demand response rates with a discount to the customer for allowing the utility to call for demand response for them to reduce load and minimize the capacity need. So that value, is taken on by all ratepayers, and so making sure that is compensated back to all ratepayers accurately is very important, especially as you're taking them to a wholesale market, that all those market signals are there, so we can gain the biggest value as you stack it up from an avoided cost, TD and G.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, and we'll get into hopefully have time to get into issues of equity and cost allocation a little bit later. But you raised some really important points about the value that the utility can bring in managing these types of resources. So another favorite topic is the value of DERs, and really enabling that value is central to 2222 objectives. And as Erica knows, CAISO has allowed DER participation in its market since 2016, and is proposing several tweaks to comply with FERC 2222. but CAISO's DIRT program has limited or no uptake. I looked on the website again yesterday and I couldn't quite tell, but I don't think there's been any uptake as of late. So I'm curious what the barriers have been to DER participation in CAISO, and what can other ISO utilities learn from the California experience with respect to how DERs are compensated? And I guess that one's for you, Erica.
Yeah, so I mean, my understanding is also that there's no participation. There may be some, but there's none that I'm aware of. I would say, you know, one barrier is most of our distributed energy resources are NEM resources, so net energy metering resources, and they're very richly compensated, multiple times what we would compensate a supply side resource. And I think our position on this is probably well documented. We think that, you know, it's time to reform NEM. Given that they have that sort of rich compensation available for, you know, sitting on the roof and just generating whenever, you don't really have to respond to any signals or change your behavior, or, you know, install special equipment that would be required to participate in CAISO. I think so long as that exists, it's hard to see the NEM eligible resources deciding to go the CAISO route. It's just unlikely that they'll make as much money. So I would say that is an initial barrier. But I think we can also understand other barriers looking at DER participation that we've seen in CAISO. So looking at DR participation in particular. And I think, you know, there's a lot of complexity there for the customer and the aggregators, and costs upfront that make it difficult. I believe also for the DERA program, there's no resource adequacy compensation. So that's even more of a handicap compared to what we do for our DR aggregations, where they are provided a capacity value. So I think identifying that capacity value is a good step that would push forward people to participate. I think the other area we might see participation could be electric vehicles, since those are not eligible for NEM. And, you know, we're really excited about electric vehicles helping us out, because the challenges we have to decarbonization are significant. And if we can get electric vehicles aggregated, that could reduce requirements to procure additional supply side resources and potentially transmission. So those are things that we're excited about, but those barriers, the telemetry costs, setting up a scheduling coordinator, you know, the process of determining what capacity contribution you would have if that is adopted for aggregated exporting resources. All those things are complexities that I think we need to do a little work to figure out how to make that easier for aggregators, and really we're hoping seamless for customers. We want them to not have to think about this. So those are just a few of the hurdles. We do have, the other thing I will say is California has a couple different models for DR participation. Some of it is like a supply side resource that participates in the CAISO market, and some of it is more on the retail bill compensation side. And one thing we've heard from stakeholders is that for we've proposed a real-time pricing pilot for EVs as part of a settlement, and it hasn't been adopted by the commission yet. We were initially like, let's take this and get it participating in CAISO. But what we heard from stakeholders was the costs and the barriers there were significant. And we eventually agreed that starting with retail-based compensation makes sense, with the idea that we'll eventually tackle those barriers and get into a place where they're optimized with CAISO resources.
Yeah, thank you. It is very complicated, and it's great that PG&E is taking that first stab with electric vehicles. That's really important. I'm curious if Justin or Jeff have other.
Maybe you're curing me anyway. Sorry. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that complexity piece. It's true, it will be difficult, but I think that is why utilities need to have that role, at least at the table of the aggregation, because as you've seen, like demand response programs, particularly ones that are residential, particularly have a wide swath of customers, many of which may not be sophisticated. like, that's a really good place for a utility to play because we can bring the scale. We are regulated, and so people are ensuring that what we are communicating is correct, what, that is fair to the extent, that policymakers and utilities can make it so. And I think that's why, especially with electric vehicles, when I think of, you talk about distributed resource, I mean, that is like the ultimate distributed resource. And that is a place that I see like utilities in the future. It may end up being a retail program and not necessarily, wholesale, but with the complexity of the wholesale, I think there is a role for the utility to be sort of at the the residential site. I know like with commercial customers and they're sophisticated, they have scaled, that is a place that you might often see, aggregations happening more, that the larger, competitive DRAs. But I do feel like that's, that complexity, that's where utilities can help try to make it as seamless as possible and do it in a way that's very transparent and, understood by all.
Thank you, Justin. Jeff, anything to add here?
Yeah, no, completely agree with what Justin and Erica was saying. Is the utility can bring all those aspects together, add that value. And we've done it with thermostats, we've done it with other programs. I think really recognizing what the customer fatigue would be and the customer adoptions, and how willing are they to give up control or to allow more control of different assets that they have, is still a lot of questions that's got to be answered as you think about the opportunity to use these really kind of as a virtual power plant kind of concept.
So I think we're all agreeing that it's complicated, and I'm hearing, that utilities are, in a good position to orchestrate some of that complexity. I guess maybe we're going to pivot here now to what are sort of the challenges in doing that. We've been at this for a while, and utilities have been at this for a while, stakeholders have been at this for a while, and it's time to sort of make some real change here. So I guess one thing that I think you all agree is that utilities have been revisiting their grid mod plans and technology roadmaps, and have been looking at how to upgrade aging infrastructure and improve reliability for some time. So, but in a high DER future, that's going to require streamlined interconnection processes and new technologies like DERMS, better telemetry and metering, as Justin mentioned. Can you talk about, how you're planning for this increased capability, kind of what's in the way and how these investments might impact affordability?
Yeah,
Maybe.
I'll jump in here. We're definitely looking at different opportunities. We've got some pilot programs that we're trying to get started on with some batteries to really kind of understand maybe how we can use batteries in these kind of situations. We've been thinking about the thermostats and how we can get more value out of the thermostat without creating some kind of customer fatigue or concerns there. We've typically been a purchaser of capacity, and so the value is definitely there for these assets, and bringing that value back to all ratepayers. I think it's when we think about the affordability is, most DER assets, batteries and that kind of thing are very expensive. So we get into this equity issue is, how are all customers really going to be able to take advantage of these more expensive kind of DER assets? We've also been doing a little bit around non-wires alternatives and how does these play a role? And when you think about these 100 kW minimums in a particular node, how do you aggregate these smaller assets up to that amount in a node? So all these are things that take a great deal of telemetry to be able to see all of them and have insight into them to get them all to work together. Again, it goes back to that whole, it's complicated.
Complicated and expensive, it sounds like both.
I'll jump in. I mean, so first of all, again, there's a lot of utilities that are part of Exelon, but a number of them have done a lot of investments in this. So I'll say where we are, which is where we feel like pretty advanced by our industry standards, but then also talk about how far we have to go. So like hosting capacity mapping is available in a number of our jurisdictions by utilities. Discrete DER forecasting as far as capacity planning is something we're implementing at one or more utilities, and that's something that's going to be more and more seen throughout, the utilities that we have. EV programs, as well as pilots around non-wires alternatives. So we are going down this path, but we're also in a world where there's low levels of DER penetration have allowed us to look at interconnection from a very conservative perspective, where we look at it worst case scenario. So the worst day, so if it's a generator, it's like the lightest load day, and we're seeing if the load can handle max generation total, highest level on solar installation, or the reverse if it's a load. We look at the heaviest, like it's a day like today across a lot of our places, and maybe there's some outages here or there. We have to look at all those different implications. But like the way that we're sort of operating right now, almost across the board, is when it gets connected, we don't have a lot of visibility into what's happening there. And this world that's envisioned by FERC Order 2222, where there's talking about the utility will look at this all these resources on their system, give a day before reliability, we'll override in real time. Like that is going to be a long road. And that presumes that first we now have real-time monitoring, or at least some kind of monitoring of the systems. We have a way to directly communicate to them bi-directionally. We have a reliability system in ADMS, which, by the way, we are rolling out an ADMS across Exelon. But DERMS is still something we need to engage on, and that's still something we know industry-wide we're still trying to figure out. So the FERC Order 20, I want people to be realistic that there's a lot of things that have to happen. They do involve investment. They do involve a changing of the relationship between the DER, the DER and the distribution utility, in terms of now we're going from low levels of penetration, and maybe PG&E, you're a little different with high levels of penetration now, but we're going from lower levels of penetration to these 50% reduction net zero targets that we see that are not as far off as they seem. And how are we going to get there is we need to have more of that sort of interactive relationship that doesn't exist today, and requires investment and requires changes in regulations and close partnership. And utilities are obviously not going to figure out by themselves. We need partnerships across the board, webinars like this, where you at least kind of talk about what's happening, going to conferences. We need more of that because there's a lot that has to be figured out, at least speaking from ourselves.
Thank you, Justin. Erica, anything to add here?
I mostly agree. I would say PG&E has higher levels of DER penetration. A lot of that is not dynamic in any way, right? It's rooftop solar that sort of generates as the sun shines. And then we have a variety of other programs that are dynamic, but I would guess that the biggest sort of capacity punch is from the NEM resources. I think we're in the same boat on a lot of things. I believe we're rolling out ADMS. We've requested funding for DERMS. I'm not sure that that's been granted yet. I think in some ways, I think it's like to be determined if the benefits of these DERs outweigh the costs of that investment. I think we hope that it does in the long run, but we're depending a lot on customer behavior, and we don't know exactly what operation of these resources will look like. And to Justin's point, our distribution grid was set up not for two-way flow, and to sort of reconfigure that is going to involve a lot of investment. So the way I envision it happening is, we get approval to do these investments in the system. Customers are going to continue to bring DERs to the party. They already have, and with EVs, they're going to continue to bring them. And so what I envision is, a series of different pilots for us to figure out what works for us, what provides the most value, where do we get distribution deferral value, for example? What does a delivery fleet look like? Do they come back charged? Can they discharge during the peak? We don't know the answer to any of those questions right now. So I think what we'll see is we start getting the technology in place, and we'll start testing it out. And our sort of utopia vision is this is seamless for the customers, and we can kind of behind the scenes manage their charging. We don't have to build as much large scale resources. We can reduce our reliance on thermal generation over the peak. But to me, there's just a lot of unknowns and a lot of potential.
Thank you. Yeah.
Patty,
Okay.
sorry, I thought of one other thing too, is that kind of rings true here is just the whole education piece of even internally. You know, our distribution transmission folks have, you know, had steel in the ground type of assets that are very reliable. And when you think about the reliability, the affordability for the acceptance of DERs that we may have less control of, takes a lot of education and a lot of understanding from our system operators, et cetera, to really understand and feel comfortable that dispatching these kind of assets.
Yeah, I would actually add to that education for the customers too. So PG&E has just been rolling out a residential TOU, and like people I know who I think are very smart people, just they don't understand why energy costs more at certain times, or like they just haven't thought about it, you know, and in some ways that's perfect for our customers to not think about it. But this is the duck curve starting to impact their daily lives. They're having to think about when they're going to do laundry. And I think if we add this layer on top, there's going to be a lot of customer education that happens, especially with residential customers.
Yeah,
We were joking, we were meeting yesterday, you know, Eric was talking about they're still trying to figure out how to get to this high pen. And I've told, like, I feel like there's been multiple meetings where someone says, well, how's California? How are they doing in California? How's PG&E doing it? And, you know, it's just a lot to say, you know, the utilities are on different trajectories, but we're all collectively have a work to do that has not yet been solved on this integration piece.
Very, very true. And I think, I'm not sure if Justin or Erica, you both, or maybe Jeff mentioned partnerships. And I just want to reinforce that. And I'm just really glad to hear that. There's so many partnerships that we need to foster in this industry. Not only, you know, between utilities and stakeholders, but, you know, Jeff, you mentioned between, you know, grid operators and who are used to using steel and, you know, people in the customer programs who are going to be, you know, reaching out and trying to, you know, work with customers to manage some of these customer-sided assets. It's a whole other form of partnership in a sense. So there is lots of work and lots of education to do. And I think keeping the customer central to that conversation is really important. So on that note, so I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of cost allocation, but 2222 provides a mechanism for, you know, multiple entities to engage with customers for the purpose of load management, which really raises the question of what value are we trying to create? You know, are we creating sort of monetary value? Are we creating sort of societal value through greenhouse gas emission reduction? Who's paying for that value and who's benefiting? So I guess I'm wondering, is the industry thinking holistically about this and with the interests of customers in mind? Maybe starting with Jeff on this one.
Yeah, it's a tough question. Yeah, definitely thinking of it from an industry and the customer aspect is, you know, is how do we, again, I mentioned a little bit earlier, is these DER assets are expensive. So it goes back to the whole equity, you know, how does the limited income type of situation get to participate in these, and we're not putting burden back on that element of our customers. You know, we've done a few studies on looking at, you know, where is the value of DER assets. And, you know, for us in Oklahoma, in our utility situation, the capacity value to the utility is greatest. But there's also the T&D, and as we become more and more renewable with that intermittent resource, I'm sure there's going to be continued value there on the G side. But yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. How do we allocate that cost back?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I raise it just because I'm not sure folks are thinking about that in the context of 2222. I've heard a lot about different entities, you know, wanting to engage with customers, and I think there's really not a perfect solution there yet or an answer. But Erica or Justin, any insights on this one?
I'll
I would
jump
say,
in.
oh, go ahead,
Okay.
Justin.
Okay. Well, so I have a little, previous to joining it being on the Exelon team, I was at PG&E, and there are some jurisdictions like Maryland that are wrestling with this, and sort of my takeaway is that there doesn't seem to be a great consensus on this. I do know that, first we have to dispel the notion that we can integrate high levels of DVR without investment in our system, or that these DERs will pay for themselves. We have to invest. There's going to be communications infrastructure, IT infrastructure, physical infrastructure like new transformers and substations that will need to be upgraded. There's going to be more throughput, both bidirectionally. And more communication. We need to invest. So the question, who pays for it, and it's not clear. But I do know, like, for instance, at least at the locational level, the system right now that we have in a lot of jurisdictions is, a solar facility may connect directly to a feeder and no upgrade cost. And that last one that submits that interconnection, suddenly they have a $2 million upgrade. That obviously is a system that is not really going to work over the long term. And I think that's, at least collectively as industry, we're like, okay, this is the straw that broke the camel's back. Paradigm is not there. So who pays for it? I mean, I think where we were when I was at least at BGE and in the Maryland side is that there's some combination of that specific DER owner, the DER market writ large, maybe through an interconnection fee that's standard, some kind of ratepayer piece, because this is something that will be part of, there will be aspects of this that benefit the grid. You are providing more capacity on the grid overall, and this is sort of a policy good, which, we do know has some kind of, bearing there. And then beyond that, if there's a wholesale distribution charge or something, that's something that's unexplored. But again, if we are now having a number of wholesale entities, participating here and using wholesale rates, we have to think about whether they need to also put in, especially for like things like storage, EVs that are also like pulling in from the load, not from the grid, not just discharging. So there's no good answer, but there was some combination of those. That's what I took away from, is that there's some combination of that. And it's not, we have to wait for the perfect policy solution that hasn't yet emerged.
Yep. And Erica, I'm curious, I read that PG&E and Tesla just inked this deal for this under the emergency load reduction program, where Tesla's getting compensated. How do you think the benefits of that program will be allocated across customers? And I'm not sure how close you are to that, but just it seems like a relevant example of this topic.
Yeah, I think it's a good example. I think it's hopefully not a typical example, because we're in an emergency capacity situation in California, which is impacting the pricing and sort of the urgency there. I think we're cognizant that there, especially with our history with net energy metering, that there's a lot of equity concerns with how costs are shared and which segment of our customers benefit. And similar to NEM, I think we're going to expect or what we're seeing with storage adoption and also EV adoption, that the first movers, at least in California, tend to be wealthier. So there's an equity concern there. I think we are trying to balance that with things like the reliability sort of crisis that we're in. And then also, as I mentioned before, I think what we're seeing, the path I'm seeing that California seems to be going down, is piloting a lot of different programs. And I think we have to balance those equity concerns with, at least for some of these near-term programs, basically kicking a new product off. And then maybe there's some cost shifts that occur associated with that. Maybe we provide some incentives. Maybe we have a program like ELRP that has pretty generous compensation and likely wealthier customers participating. So I think we're okay with that, as long as we don't get stuck in a world like net energy metering, where there's sort of systemic issues that kind of multiply into a multi-billion-dollar cost shift. So I think it's more probably art than science. I think we also do, Justin sort of described some of the specific costs and who pays for those and how to do that fairly. I think that work is ongoing as well. So how do we make sure the folks that trigger the infrastructure investment that will be able to sell to the CAISO market? How do we make sure they pay for that, but make sure we don't saddle like the person that happened to be the wrong number in line paying for it, if there's multiple people benefiting from that same investment? So those are things that we're working through, but I would say I don't think we have perfect answers to them.
Thank you. And I'll just put in a word for a proceeding that the CPUC has open right now that the California IOUs are participating in. It's called the Clean Energy Financing Options Proceeding. And in PG&E's case, there was a proposal to basically provide a financing platform that would leverage third-party capital to keep some of these customer-sided assets and investments off the backs of ratepayer, but facilitate getting them out sooner than later. So it's a great innovative idea. I'm hoping that the CPUC has a favorable decision on that. I think it's really innovative in what we need to be doing in this day and age.
Yeah, thank you for plugging that for me. I should have brought it up.
Yeah, it's meant to address not only equity issues, but just affordability overall, and the need to decarbonize at scale. So it's a great proposal that PG&E has. So I've got one last question, and I guess, you know, this is more of a higher level sort of philosophical question, but, you know, when you think about the effort that many utilities are undertaking to decarbonize and, you know, achieve some of their clean energy goals, you know, they're looking at increased building electrification and transportation electrification, and integrating, you know, greater levels of intermittent resources, you know, which is, as Justin mentioned, sometimes there's not a lot of visibility to those. So it's a really complicated ecosystem that is being managed and that needs to basically manifest as we go forward to achieve some of these clean energy goals. So I'm wondering, aside from the issue of wholesale market participation, how do you see the future of DER aggregation playing out? You know, it could take the form of virtual power plants even, but how do you see that playing out in terms of meeting societal needs like decarb, and what role should utilities play in that future? And I guess, you know, it comes down to a question of is 2222 the best on-ramp for this, or is there, you know, maybe a better forcing function to achieve some of these, you know, policy goals? And you can self-nominate who wants to go first on this one.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I mean, the way that we look at it is there's DER integration and there's 2222, and you know, the former is broader than the latter, but the latter has specific regulatory timelines and things that you can really point to that helps sort of crystallize some of the key things we have to think about. There's a lot of things that, you know, FERC Order 2222 and, you know, larger complex projects isn't really a part of it. But I do think 2222 is helpful and really helping a lot of utilities, as well as state commissions, as well as RTOs, to really say, okay, it's time to get serious about this. We have decarbonization goals. We have proliferations of DERs. Again, hitting the point. How much storage are we going to have in this country with regards to EVs? And what are we going to do with all that? Because it's only driven a small percentage of the time. We're going to have a lot of distributed resources out there, and we need to start thinking about how it's integrated. I do think there's a, you know, speaking, you know, again, I'm Exelon, I'm representing distribution utilities, so we don't own generation. So we have a bit of a different, you know, perspective on a few different things. So when we're looking at this, you know, the subject of non-wire solutions may come up, and I do think there's some opportunity just with like demand response and some other programs. If we look at our energy efficiency and demand response programs, they're probably the most successful non-wire solutions you'll see in any market. Who knows how much, you know, investment has been offset by broad scale demand response, not necessarily localized, but just reducing that peak, reducing the throughput on those peak days. And so I think that can be part of that solution is continuing to double down on these DR programs, really reducing those system peaks. And the utility can be great because we don't necessarily have to monetize directly with wholesale markets. I know there are some jurisdictions where they have a way of compensating utility, or, you know, creating a way where you say, if you reduce this amount, it reduces this amount of capacity, or removes this amount of transmission that's invested, and there's an assumption of how much distribution is done, and it can even be localized and create a localized value. So I think it allows us to, as a distribution utility, we have a unique perch to not just say who's putting money in our account from the RTO, but we can think about it holistically and what is reducing costs for all of our customers. And so that's why I kind of see the VPP sort of going, is that there may be some wholesale applications, but there may be some things that sort of build on the DER frameworks, demand response frameworks, into something that, elevates as we start to see really, injection level, devices in our distribution that are dispatchable.
I like that. I like that vision, Justin.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, I'd agree. Justin said it very well. In my role, I'm all about enabling our customers to make the most efficient use of energy. And DERs is definitely the up and coming asset that's going to help customers do that. And, just making sure we get the rules and the processes right to do it accurately, fairly, reliably for all, I think is a daunting task, but an exciting task. And I think FERC 2222, the way Justin said it, it pushes us down that path and starts to put some dates to these things. And there's a lot to be discussed. There's a lot of investment still to be made to make that happen. But yeah, it's the next step. And as a service utility, we're willing to work with partners to make this happen. We're just making sure we bring the value back to the end ratepayer at the same time.
Thank you, Jeff.
I think I would just echo a lot of what Jeff and Justin said, and for sort of California specific spin, I think for those of us who work at PG&E, we're also, residents of California, and we see, EVs as potentially beneficial for the utility, but also 40% of the emissions in our state are from transportation. That's way higher than the emissions associated with our electrical system. And so there's just a lot of promise there. At the same time, I think we recognize we can't just lean on supply side solutions to meet that load. The scale of build out as we're trying to decrease our reliance on fossil fuels over the same time is just sort of untenable. And then we also live in a state that the wildfire risk, especially for PG&E's territory, since we have a lot of the forested lands in California, is significant. And so I think we're looking to improve how we work with our customers to solve this problem. And so, part of that could be, FERC Order 2222 participation in the CAISO market. Part of it can be expansion of some of our what we call like load modifying programs for exports as well. I think this is sort of an all-comers situation as long as you're not emitting fossil fuels. So I don't know exactly what the future looks like, but strong commitment from PG&E, and we've seen this from the CPUC as well, to increase our reliance on distributed generation and work with customers to decarbonize together.
Thank you, Erica. And as I'm listening to all of you, I just keep thinking of this old analogy of, flying the plane and building it at the same time. And it's not just that, it's doing that when there's, just a pretty large existential threat. So I like these visions. I think the idea of partnerships and all comers is really important. We're not going to get there without all hands on deck. So I don't know if we have questions. I've been seeing a few chats. I know Eric Van Orden mentioned something. Rich Phillips, do you see any questions or anything in the chat box here?
Yeah, Eric did enter a question in the chat there. Patty, can you see that, or do you want me to read it?
So the PLMA Spark DER Innovation Task Force identified the following 6 challenges. when it comes to 22 wholesale market valuation, is one more of a challenge than others? Okay, so the challenges are quantifying and monetizing value stacking, customer engagement / empowerment / education, metering and communications, regulatory education and structures. 5 is integration standards, and 6, relative cost. In other words, DER versus grid scale cost. So those are the 6 challenges that the PLMA Spark DER Innovation Task Force are considering. And Eric is asking which of those is more of a challenge than others. Is there all of the above choice?
A non-answer to the question. I mean, I think one thing, distributed resources are so much harder than supply side resources. I also work on the large scale resources. And one of the reasons they're hard is because, you know, within the utility, even with dedication towards pursuing these, you end up coordinating across all these different groups, all of whom have their sort of their own scope and work plan. And that sort of cross-functional coordination within the utility, we need similar cross-functional coordination within our regulator. So I think each of them are hard in their own ways, but to me, the biggest challenge is solving them all as one when you're dealing with a lot of different disparate groups and interest. I view that as the hardest challenge so far.
Well, the one that kind of jumped out at me was metering and communications, because it's a technical challenge. But I think the broader stroke is that, and I've seen this across the board, is that I think in the past you had the delivery side of the business, that focused on certain levels of innovation, and you had your policy strategy folks, and the policy folks worked on rate making and putting things on the proceeding, and then the other folks kept the electrons on, lights on, electrons flowing. I think the DR integration is requiring us to break those down even more. Like we have looked and said, can we just do policy strategy? You can't have a policy strategy around telemetry and monitoring and control without having your operations folks and your capacity planning folks literally in the same room. Like, because what we want to say in a regulatory proceeding is like, well, what level of granularity do we need? What does our system require? How much is it going to cost to implement the IT? And I think it has broken down a lot of these barriers. And I look at a lot of these, they seem like policy discussions or the subjects of PDFs. And I'm like, I'm kind of more keen to say, like, what actually is needed to get all these on the system? Like, technically, like, what is the software that's needed? What's the hardware that's needed? And like, that's kind of like, I mean, it's like a complex, imagine like the crazy algorithm that's going to be needed, where you have how many individual actors on your grid. Like, that's going to be the challenge, is how you let all these individual actors work in a symphony. And like, as a future DSO or as a current DSO, however you want to define it, we'd like to think we're the orchestrator of that, but also it's like, we don't know how we get there.
Right, exactly. Yep. Eric or Jeff, there's another question in the chat, but I want to give you a chance to, or Jeff, maybe respond to this.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
I think I'd go back to your flying the plane. They're all important. They're all being worked on at the same time. So.
Yep. Okay. So another question we got was, and thank you for this question. To successfully implement 2222, do you think there would be changes needed in the utilities cost of service business model? What role would instruments like performance-based regulation play in this effort?
I'll jump in. I mean, there's already a lot of movement happening on this, so I think the state regulatory commissions that we've been working with are like seeing that this is an important step. I know in many of our jurisdictions, we're now in multi-year rate plans, and also exploring performance incentive mechanisms, which are sort of a nice bridge in terms of looking at penalties through like a return of equity percentage or something like that. I think those are good steps, well crafted, as long as they ensure there are things that the utility can have power over, that it helps meet state goals. These are things that we can control, and that they don't put us in a place where we suddenly have to worry about our bond ratings and things like that. But it seems like, our experience has been at the state regulatory commissions that they've been very thoughtful on how we're moving down this path, and we're right there with them and trying to see what are the right metrics that you can explore to make sure that it's not just just straight traditional rate making, that we start that evolution.
Erica or Jeff, anything you want to add to that?
No, that's probably a little beyond my scope.
Yeah,
that's a tricky one.
Yeah, it is a tricky one. And, everybody likes to talk about the cost of service business model, but, as several of you have mentioned, some of these investments are going to be expensive, and they do need to be invested in, and there needs to be a way of paying for those to enable, a lot of these benefits that we all need, pretty quickly relative to decarbonization. So it's the proverbial, there's no such thing as a free lunch, perhaps. So I don't see any other, hold on. So another comment, I guess, question. Thank you for this. The panelists have commented on some innovative pilots and programs they're offering or plan to offer to customers. Can each of you elaborate on the move towards compliance with Order 2222? Is that movement towards compliance influencing their vision for the advancement of customer programs, maybe within the next 3 years and then beyond? And Jeff, I don't know,
Yeah.
you mentioned the battery pilot that you talked about. I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that 2222 influenced it as much as just the technology. Seeing batteries and their great potential and supporting the grid, how do we, as the utilities, work with them to get the value out of batteries, whether it's a battery that's installed with solar or battery standalone or an EV. That's kind of what we're kind of looking at is how do they interact with the grid and what's the value back to the utility, or back to all ratepayers, I should say.
Yeah, and there's been, the Commonwealth Edison or ComEd in Illinois has really been on the forefront of like DERMS pilots. There's the Bronzeville microgrid, and they are also having a pilot related to a flexible interconnection where there's an ability for the distribution and ComEd to curtail to ensure that they can increase the amount of hosting capacity in that specific feeder. So I feel like those aren't like customer, not particularly customer programs, that Bronzeville could be considered that. But really, they are trying to get at this, like, how do you move to a different framework, operational framework for DERs to increase that ability to bring more on board.
I just said California might be a little different in that there already was a mechanism that CAISO had, and of course made some tweaks to it. But I think, to Jeff's point, technology being sort of more of a driver, because we already had that path. So what are the technologies that are emerging? What can they do? How can we best leverage those? And then the other thing that's a driver is sort of what works for customers. So I mentioned before, we put forward a proposal in one of our proceedings to have aggregated EVs, commercial EVs that are on a real-time pricing rate, actually export into the CAISO market through an aggregator. And the feedback we got was kind of like, customers might not be ready for that. So maybe we start with a retail-based compensation before we get to that point. So that's just an example of like, we were excited about it. We thought these were sophisticated customers on a real-time rate. Let's get them actually exporting CAISO. But we listened to the feedback that there's a lot of complexity there, and we're taking sort of baby steps. So I think it's more technology and customer acceptance driven at this point, our planning.
And PG&E's been doing epic pilots for years on this. Before 2222 was a twinkle in anybody's eye. So
yeah, and I'll say I think we have 3 different vehicle to grid integration pilots that are separate from that settlement that I just mentioned. And I don't believe any of those are exporting to the grid in the first year. And even then, it might be a rate and not CAISO interconnected. So, you know, I think we're trying to figure out what are the sequential things that need to happen, and one of technology is part, but also like customer understanding kind of how to do this type of things needs to happen first.
Absolutely. So I see Rich Phillips has showed up here. So I think that means we're at time. And I just want to say thank you so much to the panelists today. I really appreciate your insights and your candidness. We have a lot of work to do, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you and all the other partners in this space to have a much larger impact going forward. So, and thank you to PLMA for hosting this, and Rich, thank you so much.
Well, again, thank you, Patty and Jeff and Erica and Justin for joining us today and participating in this roundtable conversation. It's deeply appreciated and helps as we continue in this series to build more understanding about what all change is going on and how it may impact us as practitioners. Again, as I said earlier, this is part 2 of this series. Part 3 is still in the planning stages. We're aiming for maybe late August, early September, and with the focus being about for all these things to happen. You heard Justin wax about quite a bit about, all the technology things that are going to happen. Where our investments need to be happening in software and communications and technology and different types of solutions. And we're going to bring some people to bear that are in the investment community talking about what things are that they're interested in and what things that they think are going to be worthwhile to grow as we see this sea change happening in the energy industry. So, also, this presentation is recorded, will be available on your favorite podcast platform, probably starting tomorrow, Monday at the latest. In addition, you can access it through the PLMA Load Management Resource Center on our website. That's a searchable content library of PLMA's webinars, publications, conference sessions, and more. That resource center is open to everyone, and we'll again post a recording of today's session there for those who want to pick this up later. And a few reminders of other things going on. Again, we'll plug there for the resource center. Next week, July week from today, it'll be the next in our other summer series, the 19th PLMA Award winners. This session will have Olivine and Pacific Gas and Electric talking about their work and load flexibility for complex customers and solutions. In addition, the following week, we have 2 days where our PLMA Evolution of DR to DER training course will be made available. We normally offer this adjacent to our in-person conferences, but are making this online edition available to help those who might not be able to travel to Phoenix in November and want to pick up this survey course or get it under their belt before potentially attending other PLMA training later this year. On August 4th, 2 weeks from today, PLMA members are invited to join Electric Transportation Interest Group as they host a hot topic conversation on the impact of tariffs on medium and heavy duty electric vehicle adoption. So again, we talk a lot about electric vehicles. Lots of times the conversation is about cars and what's going on in homes. But what's going to happen with medium and heavy duty electric vehicles is where an awful lot of the meaningful change is going to occur. And then on August 16th, our Women in Demand Management Affinity Group is going to be hosting a fireside chat with former SECC President Patty Durand. Patty is currently actually running for the Georgia Public Service Commission and is going to join us for a conversation about public service commissions and PUCs in general and the role that they play as we deal with all the variety of issues and change going on in the industry. And lastly, just a reminder, PLMA released this week their agenda for their upcoming 46th conference in Phoenix, November 14th through 16th. That's where you'll see part 4 of this webinar series that we started as webinars, but we're going to do part 4 in person at the conference in an effort to wrap up what's going on across this series and hear the views of practitioners and what they think all this really means. So please look forward to joining us there as well. You've been listening to a Load Management Dialogue presented by PLMA. To learn about upcoming dialogues and for an archive of past recordings, visit peakload.org or your favorite podcast platform. This concludes this edition. Thank you.